Welcome to Genealogy Adventures, where we uncover the hidden histories that shaped African Americans and who we are. I'm Brian Sheffy.
And sorry. And I'm Donya Williams. Today's episode takes us beyond the familiar story of the Underground Railroad. You know, that journey north through secret networks ending in Canada. But what if I told you that heading north was just one direction people took to claim freedom?
And exactly. And before we get into this, as always, sorry we forgot to say we're so excited about today's topic. We forgot the usual niceties. Thank you for joining us, spending the next 60 minutes with us. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Always, always. We love you guys. I am a little sick today, so please bear with me, guys. I'm suffering from a really bad headache, but I'm gonna be all right. I'm gonna be all right.
But exactly as Donya just said a minute ago, the story is much larger than the kind of very famous Underground Railroad that always, we talk about that leads to Canada. So exactly, some people fled south, they fled west, and some even went across the actual ocean. And their paths were as diverse as the people who actually walked those paths. And these weren't just acts of escape. I'm going to really invite you to think about that. This was much more than just escaping slavery. These were bold, strategic movements across borders and cultures, and all grounded in the simple human desire to live free.
Right. So today we're exploring 6 lesser known routes to freedom that challenge what we think we know about the geography of Black liberation.
So we're going to open with talking about the southern migration routes. And the first one that we're going to touch on is migration paths down to Spanish-held Florida. So we're roughly talking about the period of the 1730s up to about 1821. So starting in the early 1700s in Spanish Florida, and this is before Florida became part of the United States in 1821, it's worth remembering that it was a Spanish-held territory. And Spain really did something really, really unthinkable and remarkable for the time. It actually offered asylum to enslaved Africans trying to escape the British colonies in places like South Carolina and Georgia. And, part of this wasn't magnanimous. Spain and England were beefing. You have to remember they were both colonizing European countries, trying to claim their territory. So they were always kind of mixing it up, as well as the French. But there was a catch, a simple catch. Any enslaved person seeking freedom in Florida, they had to convert to Catholicism, and then they had to serve in the Spanish militia.
But think about it, what that really meant for someone running from a British plantation to Spanish Florida wasn't just a refugee. It was a nation recognizing their humanity. And from that policy came something incredible. Fort Mose, established in 1738, just north of St. Augusta, the first legally sanctioned free Black settlement in what's now the United States.
Mm-hmm. And Sharon asked a question. I'm presuming, Sharon, you're asking about the Spanish, whether or not they wanted to buffer against the Native Americans. I didn't look into that. Maybe perhaps someone who's really much more knowledgeable about this really early period of Florida can answer that question. My guess is the Spanish would be much more interested in subverting Britain's success in North America. Would kind of be my guess on that one. But that's a really interesting question that I wish I had an answer to. However, there is a great book, and we're going to be referencing a lot of books. And if you go to the video and I will add this on YouTube as well, but specifically on Facebook, you'll kind of see our reading list. And basically, we're pulling from all of these books. And the first one that I really, really wanted to touch on is a great book by Jane Landers, and it's called Black Society in Spanish Florida. And she calls Florida a beacon of freedom for enslaved people in British North America. And Florida was really a community of free Black men, women, and children, armed, organized, and ready to defend themselves to protect their freedom. Now, Governor, and I'm going to probably mispronounce this name, and I apologize, but Governor Manuel de Montiano basically praised both their valor and their fidelity. And remember, these are going to be characteristics that are going to be echoed much later on with the United States colored troop, but we're actually seeing the first evidence of that right here in the 1730s. So these people escaping slavery, they weren't hiding in the shadows. They were standing on the front line of feuding empires, but they were doing it as free citizens. And I just think that that's really cool.
Exactly, exactly. And when Spain handed Florida over to Britain in 1763, the residents of Fort Mose refused to return to slavery, and so they fled to Cuba instead. That decision that made them, uproot again rather than live in bondage. That in itself, it speaks volumes about their strength and their clarity of purpose and just what it was that they needed to do and the movements that they needed to make.
Mhm. So we're going to touch on Cuba in a minute, but while we're in this place, this reminds me of the conversation we had on the phone this morning. We were talking about DNA matches that we couldn't figure out really on
Right,
things like
right.
Ancestry and 23andMe. I've got a cluster in Mexico. I have one cluster that I already know has to do with Patrick Henry. Part of his family eventually went to Mexico, but these aren't those people. These are Afro Latinos who are in Mexico, and I never really understood why I matched them. And then I've got another group in Panama, and I can't remember it's another group in Guatemala or Honduras. And you were saying about matches
We
that
have a lot of Hispanic. Yeah, we had Hispanic. And at first I thought it was just me, but it's actually my mom because my my biological father is Jamaican. So yeah, that I thought it was me, but it's not. My mom has that as well. And yeah, we have a lot of what is it, Hispanic, Mexico. She has it's another one. It's another one, and I can't think of what the other one was. But she has a lot of those different types, and I don't know.
and at the moment, because actually kind of rereading and doing a little bit more research to prepare for this show, it made me think of a couple of possibilities. Now, I knew it's nothing to do with my direct ancestors because they tended to be held within the same enslaving family, but it does look like a direct ancestor of mine had a sibling or siblings' children who were taken into the deep south. And then from there, I guess they made a break for freedom. I mean, that's the only way that I can explain it.
Yeah, I don't, and I haven't really looked into that portion yet. But to know that it's there is just it's so exciting. You guys kind of dig into that type of stuff way faster than I do, and I tend to slow it down when it comes to that because I'm like, okay, that stuff, it scares me because it's just like Moses all over again. That's that deep stuff, and I will not lie. Deep stuff scares me at the very onset, but then once I get into it, I get into it. But let's go to the
Mhm.
next segment. It's a great
So
segment for that.
one thing I'm going to pick up on before we go to Mexico is the really cool thing that you were talking about going to Cuba. I was talking about them going to Florida,
Mhm.
and we're seeing about how it speaks volumes about this the strength and the clarity of purpose.
Right.
There's a lot of planning to pick up and go, and then you're planning to go to a foreign country that you may not know that much about. So that takes a lot of agency. And it reminds me, and I'm sure it does you, that even in the 1700s, enslaved Africans were basically reading global politics, to understand who the enemy of the British were, who may give them comfort and succor, when they left British enslavement. So they're reading global politics really and making choices based on which colonial powers were offering them freedom. And I think that's amazing.
Come on, Brian, bring in that politics in there within this. Just
I think so.
let them know, Brian. Bring it in, that's what I'm talking about. Bring it in, let them know that we've been smart from the very beginning. This is not something that's new. We've always been able to do these things. I love it. I love it.
Not okay. Freedom is a basic human right.
That's right.
And this is just showing that there was a percentage of the enslaved population that were just not down with being enslaved. They
That's
just
right. They just weren't, and they fought it the entire way. I love it. So the next thing that we're going to start talking about is south to Mexico. And, we're going to fast forward a century and shift west to Texas and the Mexican border. After winning independence from Spain in 1821, Mexico abolished slavery entirely by 1829. And that decision made it a magnet for enslaved people seeking freedom from Texas and the Deep South.
And then you have people like historian Alice Baumgartner in her book, South to Freedom. And I highly recommend that book. It's just a fascinating, riveting read. Honestly, not bored. Pretty much cranked through that one in about 2 days. She estimates that thousands, not hundreds, not tens of hundreds, thousands of enslaved people crossed into Mexico. And here's the cool part: Mexico refused to send them back. And even when American slaveholders demanded that Mexico send them back, and to put it even to more of a context, Mexico knew that Americans wanted to invade Mexico and take it over. I mean, they were already starting to prep to take the whole northern part to turn that into Texas, plus get California and that whole corridor. So good on Mexico. They stood on business. They stood
Mm-hmm.
10 toes down, and they're like, nah, we're not sending him back. Something else to celebrate.
That part. So, can we just pause there for a second? Because thousands of people walking, riding, or swimming across the Rio Grande, no guarantee of safety, no network of safe houses, just the hope that once they reach Mexican soil, the law itself will protect them. Does that shit sound? Oh, I'm sorry, I cursed.
That's okay. We're allowed like two a season, so that we're second episode. That's your one.
That's my one. Okay, second episode. That's one. But do it sound familiar? That's all I'm saying. But this time, instead of coming out of that area, they were going into that area.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just think about that for a second, y'all. Oh, I'm so sorry I did that.
That's fine.
My head hurt. Just mark it up to the headache.
But again, that's a really powerful statement to make, because it wasn't just individuals. I mean, what you're touching on is entire community, enslaved communities, family groups made that move.
Yeah.
And taking, for instance, let's take the Black Seminoles of Florida, descendants of Africans who lived amongst the Seminole Nation in Florida. In the 1850s, those people migrated into northern Mexico and founded, and again, I'm going to probably butcher this, and I'm actually looking at my screen to try to give this name justice, El Nacimiento de los Negros in Calhulia. So their leader was a man called John Horse. He negotiated the land and protection from Mexican officials. So there we go again, getting into politics, negotiating, almost like peace treaty level stuff. That community, this is the important part, that community still exists to this day.
Come on. See, that's what I'm talking about. Look at them. And we talking about from 1850s, and this is still going on. That's such a big thing. That's a great thing. And then you got the freedom seekers. That's freedom seekers moving south across the Rio Grande, while at the same time, slaveholders in the U.S. were building walls of laws and violence to keep them in. These are the same folks that tried to get out, and now now they're coming back. Because let's be real, these are our family members, these are our ancestors, these are people we trying to figure out, Brian, how we got with these folks. That's them. We're trying to figure out why we have this, why we have their DNA, and that's them. They left and they went to Mexico, and now our cousins are coming back, are trying to come back. Like, I didn't even realize that until just doing this. But these are our cousins now coming back.
Now, let's just switch it real quick before I go into my next point. That's exactly the argument that indigenous peoples and Native American tribes in the Southwest have been saying about the Mexicans coming in. There are people. There was never a border here.
It was never a border.
We were going back and forth for thousands of years.
This right here is proof of it. This right here in itself is proof of this whole thing. especially given the fact in the mix of the DNA, we sitting here trying to figure all of this out. How, why, how, the why we have or carry this DNA. Well, there you have it. Our ancestors literally went across this border because they didn't like what was going on. So they went over here because over here was somewhere that this wasn't going to happen. And now they don't like what's going on over there. So now they're coming over here because this, they want this, or what was good, what used to be good over here. This is it. This is the reason why we have it. So this ain't nothing but our cousins coming home.
And
Coming home.
to be honest, it's the human story.
That's it.
It's just the basic human story.
That's
Migration
it.
of people all over the planet. So there's another book I really want to recommend. It's called Genealogical Fictions. And out of this, I was able to understand, Mexico, it has and had its own racial hierarchies. I mean, we see this being played out on TikTok and other social media all the time. Afro-Latinos trying to get their due recognition and their history acknowledged. So, we know Mexico has racial hierarchies, but slavery simply had no legal standing there. Remember, Mexico had already gotten rid of it, I believe, in the 1830s by that point. So, for the first time, freedom wasn't actually a favor for people, formerly enslaved people seeking their freedom. It was actually a right protected by its nation's constitution. And I think the closest the American Constitution really gets to that, apart from liberating us, well, actually, that was an executive order, was to basically say the only kind of slavery that was going to persist is if you were arrested and jailed.
Right. Right. So now we're going to talk about other places that they went. And another place was into Native nations. Some freedom seekers didn't cross the border at all. They turned west into Native American territory. So this fits in my opinion, to those that, even though we know that there were African Americans here in the 1500s, we know that. We know the Moors were here. We know we get all of that. However, this is also how that Native American blood got into some of our DNA. And you have that African American mixed in with this. And why I believe in South Carolina, we're not seeing it that well because they were of darker colored skin. So when you look at mulatto on the census record, that was possibly or probably a Native American, not necessarily a black person.
Yeah. And this is where, this country's history gets really complicated because, we know how far back our enslaved ancestry is. We know how far back we've researched those lines. So, you take a line that's coming out of 1600s, 1700s Virginia, there's a likelihood that there was mixing or admixing with the Virginia tribes, Virginia nations. Then we're going into North Carolina, intermixing with those nations, then to South Carolina, intermixing with those nations, and then you get the descendants of those mixed people,
Mm-hmm.
some of whom are trying to escape slavery, going
Mm-hmm.
into, going west. And I guess technically they were crossing a border because that was still native controlled land.
That's right.
They hadn't been suppressed at that point. So again, we're speaking about tribal nations like the Seminoles, the Creeks, and the Cherokee. And yes, I know the Creek and the Cherokee also enslaved people. But this is where it gets interesting. Sometimes, these relationships are really complex and sometimes deeply bonded. But apparently, from what I've been reading, those enslaved people seeking freedom in native lands, I don't know if I want to say welcomed is the right word, but they weren't enslaved. They were allowed to live amongst the native tribes and I guess possibly even become part of those communities. And again, these weren't just refuge seekers. Actually thinking about it, they actually did become part of the native communities through marriages, alliances, and recognizing that both populations of people shared the same struggle against the same, I don't want to say enemy, the same combatant. I think
Oh,
that's
you so sweet because I sure would have said enemy, but you that okay.
Or actually oppressor combatant.
Oppressor sounds better
Yes.
instead of saying, okay, I'll lean towards oppressor. But yeah, but the Seminole Nation especially stands out because Africans fleeing slavery in Georgia and Florida found a kind of refuge there. Together, they fought U.S. forces during the Seminole War. Historian Kevin Mulroy's Freedom on the Border traces these migrations from Florida to Indian Territory to Texas and then finally into Mexico. Did I pronounce Mulroy's? That's
Mulroy.
Kevin Mulroy's.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, that which was very interesting. I actually have to get that book. I've read snippets of it.
And speaking of the Creeks, there's an author, Daniel Littlefield. He wrote a book called Africans and Creeks. And he adds that within some native nations, African descended people actually held some leadership positions. So
Mm.
that's kind of showing the respect that they had earned within those communities, where freedom wasn't just about running away, and it was also about being woven into a new social fabric. And I've always struggled with that term running away because it makes them sound like they were fugitives. And they weren't running, there was no wrongdoing that they were running away from. You know what I mean? Convicts who escape prison, they're running away. Maybe
Yeah.
it's colonizing language that I'm kind of maybe nitpicking, but I can see they walked off. I could see where they would flee enslavement, but just running away just seems it just maybe it's cognitive with me. It seems it indicates something shameful. And there wasn't anything shameful. Something shameful was done to these people, but they themselves did not do anything shameful. Or am I
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I definitely understand what you're saying. I definitely understand what you're saying, but I think using the term running, I don't think it's used in the meaning that you're saying in it. Like I can get what you're saying with the running away and what it sounds like and what it feels like. And I definitely understand that. But when I guess when they were using, okay, I know how to say it. The slaveholder was using it in the context that you're talking about. They
right?
was running away. But the enslaved, they weren't using it in that context. They were like, I'm getting help, I'm getting away from it. I almost did it again. But it was like, I'm getting away from here. I don't need to be a part of this. This is not my move. This is not my circle. This is not what I was supposed to be, where I was supposed to be, or what I'm supposed to be doing. This is not what was supposed to have been happening in my life. I need to get away. So I think the term, and which kind of fits America anyway, because so many American words have so many different meanings. It was at this point that running had two meanings.
True.
And I think that's what it is. That what you are saying, that's what the slaveholder pushed out there.
Mhm.
But what our enslaved family members were thinking was, no, I need to get out of this situation. And the only way that I can get out of this situation is running and moving into something different and trying to get myself in my family in a safer predicament, in a safer environment, so we
Yeah.
can do whatever it is that we need to do.
I guess my quibble is with historians and or publishing editors because they just keep regurgitating the word runaway.
Yeah,
And I don't
because
think
they use it in the term, because they use it in the term of the slaveholder.
they,
I mean,
yeah,
everything is done in the term of the person that wrote the history, because that's it. Like we said, his story is written in the person that won. That's something that's always been said. So it's because it's being done in the term of the team that won. That's what it's meaning. They're not taking the other side, but you and I, we break things down all the time. We break things down to the point where we're going to see and hear both sides. This is why people like to listen to us. This is why we try to make people understand. And then this is sometimes why people get angry at us, because sometimes we do see the white side of it. and we do understand why this is happening and what happened. And yeah, that's what that is. So
Mhm.
yeah. That part.
So hopefully, in this part of the conversation, getting a little bit of a sense that the Afro-Indigenous alliances, it's a complicated story. It's a complicated history. We couldn't even begin to do it justice in like even a standalone 60-minute show. Um, but free, like I said, it's a complicated story, and really, I hope we can kind of get African, Black Americans, and Native Americans can get back to this place where we were supporting each other and having that dialogue. I understand that there's a group of people, group of lost people who've come up with the narratives saying that Black people were the original indigenous people of this country, yada, yada, yada. I don't even want to spend any time on that. That have kind of soured the relationship between Black Americans and Native Americans, but hopefully we can just put them to one side and open up that dialogue again. Because historically, we, apart from those who were enslaving us, we were tight and we had a pretty good relationship.
That's right, because it showed us that people created communities that transcended those colonial boundaries.
That part,
Yeah,
that part right
it
there.
just pushed us right together at no problem.
Mhm. And like this with the Seminoles, we, including them, we were building freedom collectively.
That's
Through
right.
this. And again, this is picking up a little bit about our agency in terms of politics and kind of crafting pseudo treaties. We don't get enough credit for that. And we were building these collectives through diplomacy, then through kinship, remember marriage and kids and all the rest of it, and even more importantly, shared resistance.
That part. That part. And it's so funny because there was even a moment in history where we tried to do that same thing with white people when they started to recognize and realize that poor white people were getting the same type of treatment, or poor indentured white folks were getting the same type of treatment that Black enslaved people were getting. And they started to merge that with them too. And they started to recognize it and realize it. And then the rich white folks started to realize a way to get them out of that.
Well,
And
that
they
was Bacon's Rebellion.
that was
Bacon's Rebellion
Bacon's rebellion. Exactly. That's what I was leaning to. Exactly.
that freaked
And they,
them out.
yeah, yeah, that's what it was. That's how they got out of that, through the Bacon's Rebellion. All of that. So it's always, we as Black people, we figure out a way, and then something always stops it. But we figure it out. We think. We've been thinkers forever. We've been thinkers. We are not dumb people. We know what we're doing. We know, and oh God, I can't wait until we realize
Yeah.
that we really are a great group of people. We
I
really
just
are.
want to pick up on, I just want to pull one thread out of what you just said before we go into the Caribbean and the sea routes, is the dominant culture seems to forget that they showed that, their ancestors and kind of the white social construct showed us what we were dealing with since 1619. Books, now, modern era now, but before, we had books, song, we saw how they treated each other. We saw the violence of which they were treating each other. And we kind of worked out, and we sat back and it's an act of self-preservation to learn how the dominant culture treats each other, to begin to learn, well, if that's how they treat each other, I'm going to get a worse treatment than that because I don't belong to that same group. So
Exactly.
it's an act of it was always been an act of self-preservation
Always.
for us. The irony being, because the dominant culture has been so exclusionary to everyone who is not them, they don't understand how other groups of people in this country think. They've never had to. They
Never.
could have, but they never had to. And that just creates an interesting kind of dynamic there. But you're absolutely right. Our agency, we watch, we observe, we absorb, and then we figure stuff out.
And
And I
then we
and I almost slipped there. That was almost my one.
Hey,
For the
you
show.
know what? At this point, why not? I'm just, I've been watching my girl that in the what is, I can't even think of her name right now, but it ain't a slip for her, it's purposely done. You hear me? She goes in on a regular basis. She will cuss you out in a minute because she'll tell them, don't bring that here, I don't want to hear it, and she goes in. So yeah, but we're gonna try to keep it clean on this line. Good try to keep it clean.
We are not of Kamala Harris's stature.
No, not it wasn't Kamala. It's a podcast on Sirius XM,
Okay.
and it's a black girl and a black guy. And sometimes he just, I swear it would be me and you, because to a certain degree it would be me and you, because you're not, you try to keep things at a certain level, but sometimes you'll follow right through with me. Whereas with him, sometimes she just shocks him at the stuff that she says. He just be like, you can hear the breathing. You can hear the breathing in his head. He's just like, oh my God, she just said that. So yeah, I have to get her name. I know y'all know who I'm talking about, but she's something else. She was just on CNN not too long ago, and she did something really great on CNN, but she didn't curse on CNN. So, okay, let's go into the maritime and escapes in the Caribbean routes. So now we're going to go seaward, and we're going to talk about the docks of Charleston, Savannah, and New Orleans.
So it may be an unusual way to think about it, an escape route, the sea being an escape route, much less an underground one. But for some enslaved people, the ocean itself became an actual route or a road to freedom. Ships bound for the Caribbean, places like Bermuda, Donnie has already said Cuba, and the Bahamas, carried more than just cargo. They carried hope, and they also carried risk.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to find that for trying to find it for Sharon. So right. So some fugitives stowed away, others disguised themselves as crew, and sometimes the sea delivered them accidentally. We know who did that. When American slave ships were wrecked or forced into British Caribbean ports where slavery had been abolished in 1834. And didn't I can't think of his name. Heavyset black man, bald head. He mailed himself. He mailed
Oh,
himself.
him. Yeah, I
Yeah,
can't think of his
I
name.
can't think of his name, but he mailed himself in a
He
nice
did.
big box, and
Mhm.
he mailed himself to freedom. And I think somebody I went to high school with found out that she was related to him. She is
Oh, wow.
yeah, she found out she was related to him. But yeah, I'm gonna find his name too.
Well, actually, you just made me think. Actually, before I get into the Creole Revolt, you had the Ellen Craft story. So she's in Georgia, very fair complected enslaved woman. She was so fair that she could pass for white. Her husband wasn't. One of my all time favorite stories. She ends up disguising herself as a wealthy male planter, books tickets on a steamboat, passing her husband off as her enslaved body servant.
Mm,
And they made their way to freedom. And she was so convincing in her guise that young, wealthy ladies who were looking for a husband flirted with her. When it comes to the ingenuity of Black people getting out from under, we're almost unmatched. I want to say that we're unmatched, but I'm going to caveat we're almost unmatched.
that part. And the man's name was Henry Box Brown.
There we go.
That was his name. Henry Box Brown, an enslaved man from Virginia who escaped to freedom at the age of 33 by arranging himself to be mailed.
Do you know how
Yep.
uncomfortable that must have been? I don't even know how long he was in that box, but you know it
Yeah.
was more than a week.
He mailed himself in he saved tobacco money to ship a 3 foot by 2 foot crate from his master's home in Richmond, Virginia to Philadelphia. The box was lined with coarse woolen cloth, contained a small hole on one side, and traveled by wagon, railroad, and steamboat. 27 hours later, an abolitionist, Passmore Williamson, and the rest of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee received the box at Williams' office. The slave himself jumped out, reportedly said, "How do you gentlemen do?" That's it. And broke into song because
Mm,
he was free. That's crazy.
that is crazy.
That's crazy.
So there was an event called the Creole Revolt, and it happened around 1841. And again, this is such a dramatic sea escape. This needs to be a movie. This ranks alongside Armistead, and I doubt anyone has actually heard about this, or very few people. 128, 128 enslaved people took control of their ship and sailed it to Nassau. And then they found freedom when the British authorities refused to send them back to the United States. I have to give it to the United States. It tried.
You tried.
It tried. Even when the British took enslaved people in the Revolutionary War to Canada, when they did it again in the War of 1812, those enslavers were demanding that Canada send those enslaved people back. And Canada was like, nah, we're not doing that. So apparently, the British in Nassau, because remember, Britain had already outlawed slavery at this point, they were like, we kind of feel you, but no, we're not sending him back. So a historian called Howard Jones, he actually wrote about the maritime rebellions and mutiny on the Armstad. Sorry, I keep putting an R in there. Armstad, showing that the sea could both be a place of trauma, but it could also be a place of liberation.
So yeah, and it's easy to forget that ports like Charleston or New Orleans weren't just gateways for the slave trade, they were also escape points. And what I find moving is that these acts of rebellion at sea had international consequences. They forced nations to confront contradictions between freedom and slavery.
Oh, absolutely. Because the Atlantic, it wasn't just a space of movement, but it was becoming a political battleground.
Yeah,
Battleground.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. So then we're going to talk about like the urban routes and invisible escapes. So we're going to shift from the open sea to the city streets. Not every freedom seeker could travel hundreds of miles. Some found liberation much closer to home. In cities like Philly, oh, I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
Go ahead.
In cities like Philly, New York, and New Orleans, people escape by disappearing in plain sight. And we definitely have stories like that.
Hmm. So, and again, using things like forged papers, simply just passing as free people of color, or they would seek refuge and they would be protected by communities of free people of color. Uh,
Right.
and more not uncommon, some actually became people. I think it's also not really recognized. There were maroon communities spread throughout the South, the slaveholding South. People seeking freedom and going into the swamps and building their communities there.
Yes. Didn't we read in what do you call it? What was the name of my favorite book? House of Bondage. Didn't we read about a guy who made a paddle on a bed of snakes?
He did.
Yeah, we read about that.
Hmm.
Yeah. So one of the most famous example is Anna Judge, who escaped from George and Martha Washington in Philadelphia. Historians Erica Armstrong Dunbar tells her story in Never Caught. Judge lived out the rest of her life as a free woman in New Hampshire, always hunted but never captured.
And those urban communities that protected people like Anna Judge, they were incredibly sophisticated. Shane and Graham White in Stylin, another book, argue that African Americans created entire cultural worlds. Now remember, we're beefing about this now. What is American culture? Does America have a culture? Is it distinct from Black American culture? Who did what, where, why, when, and all that good stuff? So in this book, Styling, he's talking about how African Americans actually did create an entire cultural world and capital through things like fashion. You think about those Tignon laws where women had to hide their hair. They weren't bashful about it. They weren't shy about it. They used the most luxurious kind of fabric that they could get a hold of. Language. We have our own kind of sub language. We have both a physical language, an audio language, and a non-verbal language. two black people in the street, we don't know each other at all. In a grocery store, we exchange a look. That's an entire sentence. That's almost a paragraph,
Yes, it is.
depending on how you do that. And our music. And, that asserted identity and sense of selfhood was established even in the most oppressive of situations.
Yes, 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 it was. So freedom wasn't always geographic, and sometimes it was psychological, cultural, social, living free, even in bondage's shadow.
Mhm. And I really I invite our audience to think about after the last election, 92% of black women and about 80 to 85% of black men were like, listen, we out. Y'all, we didn't break this. Y'all have to figure it out. I really need you to see how far back that notion goes. So Donnie was saying that freedom wasn't always geographic, that it was psychological. I'm going to say you are so spot on with that because it's a reminder that resistance, just quiet, passive resistance, can look like a revolt or like someone quietly claiming their name and dignity, but doing it on their own terms. Looks like we have some technical problems on Donya's end, so I'm going to carry on. Hope she can figure out where we are when she gets back. So now we've covered a lot of different routes. There's one last one to do, and that's travel across the Atlantic to places like Liberia and Sierra Leone. So, like I said, now we're turning eastward. We're going across the Atlantic to Africa itself. So, starting in I'm just going to say, starting in the early 1800s. Sorry, I'm just getting into the other route to freedom, and that's going back to the motherland of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Early 1800s, the American Colonization Society began sending free and self-emancipated African Americans to Liberia. It's a complicated legacy. Some saw it as exile, leaving the only land that they had ever known and land that they and their ancestors had helped build. So, yes, you're going to see it as a form of exile. But others just saw it as an opportunity.
Exactly. Historian Claude Clegg in The Price of Liberty explains that many settlers viewed Liberia as a chance.
Oh, Don, you're really suffering with your connection today. So I think what Donnie and I talked about this before the show, so I'm going to kind of summarize what she was about to say. Um, some of those settlers going to places like Liberia balanced their American identity with their African reality, and Liberia became both a refuge and a mirror, reflecting the tensions of freedom and belonging. Because again, it's the whole setting up of a colony in Africa was always going to be problematic because now people who've been oppressed and colonized are becoming colonizers on another country. But I get it. Um, that was the time period, that was the mindset. Uh, the American government had already started that process. And some of our family actually stepped up to do it. And I find this interesting. I got the first African DNA match I ever received was from Sierra Leone, and I was Liberia actually, sorry, and I was so excited because I'm like, yay, I've got my first African ancestor. Come to find out that we did share common ancestry, but it was with a group of people who left Rich Square, Northampton County, North Carolina in 1828. An enslaver had a former Quaker enslaver had freed all of his enslaved people, deeded them $25 each, and had his son arrange passage for them from Rich Square, North Carolina, to Liberia.
So
And
who we talking about, Brian?
Oh, I said I had a DNA match in Liberia, and I come to work out, and I got so excited because that was my first African DNA match. Come to find out, the only reason why the reason why they were matching me was because we shared common ancestry back in North Carolina, back
Mm,
back in the 1800s.
wow,
That was
wow.
really cool to be able to work that out.
I still haven't figured out where my African came from. where my African person came from. I have not. Where are we?
So I was talking about the whole move to Liberia and
Okay.
setting up the colony there. There was a process of reflecting on the tensions, um, as well as the freedom and the belonging. Because again, there was going to be tension between African Americans going into Africa, Liberia specifically, and then the people who were already living in Liberia.
Exactly.
There was always
Exactly.
that tension.
Right. And I think it shows something beautiful and painful at the same time with that, because even when freedom was achieved, the question remained, where do we belong?
Exactly. I couldn't have
You
said
know,
that better
we didn't
myself.
know we didn't know where we go.
Hmm.
You know?
Kind of still having that conversation as a people, because the search for freedom, it didn't end at the shoreline. It continued in how people built, governed, and defined themselves. And
That
we
part.
in this country, we still haven't had that agency. We haven't been allowed to have that agency.
Exactly. I know where I belong. I know where I belong.
This is my country.
That's
But
it.
that's not denying my African origins at all. But
Not at all.
that's 400 years ago. In 400 years, our people built a culture.
That's right.
It may not be a respected culture. That's neither
But
here
they
nor
built
there.
one.
We built a culture that is
Yes.
distinct and our own. Just like Africans who were trafficked into Jamaica, Bermuda, Barbados, Brazil, everywhere on the Western Atlantic world. And again, I think that's the amazing thing about Black people. Wherever we rocked up, we built a unique culture. Our culture here shares similarities with Afro-Brazilian culture, but then the Afro-Brazilians built something uniquely their own. And
Exactly.
that's why I don't believe in this diaspora war. I just wish we could just celebrate the uniqueness, both the similarities and the uniqueness that our ancestors built
Exactly.
wherever that ship took them.
I'm in so much agreement with you on that one, Brian. I mean, if people could really see the beauty of being brought from somewhere where we used to fight each other constantly, because that's what this was. These were spoils. These were people who were the spoils of of a fight, and then they had to be brought to a land that they were once enemies, and now they had to come somewhere else, and now work together. They were made to work together. They had no choice,
Yep.
and they created something so new and so beautiful.
And I think maybe
Why can't they see that
they even fused the best parts of their respective original cultures to merge into something
and
that's.
make something totally different? Exactly, they made something totally different, but it's like people can't see that. And I mean, why can't they see that? They can't see that because, number one, the first thing that a lot of white people say, oh, well, your own people sold you. Yeah, well, yeah, they did.
And your
I get
people sold you back in Europe,
it.
so
That
that
part.
part.
That part. But I'm not even talking about them.
Hmm.
Yes, our people sold us. They sold us because they won a fight, and they got this group of people that they won a fight from, and this is what they were able to do with this group of people. And then the other side did the same thing, and then they ended up merging those two groups of those same groups of people that were fighting. They merged them, and in
Hmm.
merging them, they made something totally different and something so beautiful. This is why we have Cameroon, Togo, Benin, and Togo, all these different things in us. Like, does anybody even recognize that? Like, do you recognize why that's happening? Because of these things. And that's the part that irritates me like the
Hmm.
most.
Although you just made me think of something, but I just want to say something first. Even in Europe, slavery was different. The Vikings practiced it differently. If you survived it, you became part of the Vikings. You found a place within their culture. But now I'm wondering if that's the reason why European colonizers feel such animus. And I'm not saying all, the segment that feels animus for us. Because we respect where our ancestors came from, we are fascinated to learn more or to recognize about the things that we developed, the origin stories for that. Yams and all, agriculture and the rice and the braids and all of those things. America makes Europeans give up their individual
Hmm.
cultures. And Germans and Italians and Swiss and Norwegians and English and Scottish and Welsh, those are distinctly different people. They don't
Mm-hmm.
even recognize similarities amongst themselves back in Europe. So
Mm-hmm.
the bargain is you give up all of what made you culturally unique for this amorphous white culture
Mm-hmm.
that's never been unifying for them
Mm-hmm.
because they
Mm-hmm.
come from such different cultures back on the old continent.
And with you saying that, because you're saying that, let's take Italian, for example. Italians took a spot in New York and they made their own thing. And now that doesn't exist anymore like that, like it did when they first came through. It's
The only
not like it was. You
No.
know, that whole Sicilian thing that they did, the mafia thing is the way that it was because of they brought their lifestyle from Italy to New York.
Mhm.
And they brought what it was they thought the all everything that they did. It was like that. Everything that they did. And now they don't have that because they had to become Americanized. They
There's,
had to do that.
there's only two populations I can think of that still more or less retain that Italianness, and that's the North Boston Italian Americans. Same with the Irish Americans and Dorchester and Southie in Boston. They still are very much connected. Well, it gets kind of less and less down the generations, but there's still a recognizable part of that culture. But with the Italians, I'm also going to shout out Montclair, New Jersey. Still very tight Italian kind of
Yeah.
Italian community. But
Yeah.
for those who've given it up, I'm starting to draw a parallel between the level of anger that European Americans have and the degree to which their families gave up their original cultures.
Mm, mm. So
Oh, wow,
we'll,
it's that time.
yeah, we're like almost at the end.
So I'm going to I'm going to preempt by just asking the question. So after all of these journeys, we've done a whistle stop tour of numerous journeys to the south, to the west, to the east, by land, by sea, and even staying within the colonies or the country. What did we learn? Well, I've learned that freedom was never a straightforward path. It was a web, and it stretched across the Americas and beyond, even as far as Africa. And each route that people took tells us something about, and again, I can't, Donnie and I can't emphasize this enough. Each route that these people took, it tells us something about the creativity, courage, strategy, and agency of people who were seeking freedom. People weren't just running away. They were navigating the world with incredible awareness, much more
Exactly.
awareness than they're given credit for.
Exactly. They read geography like a language. And I absolutely love that. They read it like a language.
They
They
did.
knew which borders mattered and which didn't. And they used that knowledge to carve out lives of dignity wherever they could find it.
Mhm. And hopefully you'll take this little nugget as something of comfort. Because the Underground Railroad, it wasn't just a direction north. It was a hemisphere-wide movement, a mosaic of routes shaped by law, geography, and human will. And while every effort has been made to make African Americans feel as though we're on our own and have always been on our own, we are not on our own. We are
No, and it
connected throughout this whole hemisphere.
yes, yes. And in tracing those roots, we see something powerful and freedom wasn't given, it was claimed.
Oh, that's beautifully said.
Just taken. Thank you very much. And I want to let y'all know the lady's name is Reese Colbert, and she don't play no games. Sharon, look her up. Look her up. She don't play no games. I freaking love Reese Colbert. She's
Mhm.
great.
So that's where we're going to leave this discussion today. Like I said, you will find our resource list. It should be the top comment. The first comment that you see on Facebook, I promise I will copy and paste this into YouTube, so it'll appear there, and you'll find our source list and further readings in the show notes. If today's episode expanded your sense of what freedom means and what it's meant, and where it could be found, please share it with someone who you think loves history.
Yes, yes, please do that. And remember, your family story is a part of this bigger story of courage and resilience.
And I am so sorry, cousin and co-host. I actually wrote down a note about what the next show is, and I can't find that note.
And I don't have it open, so you guys will see that as we post it.
Yes, indeed. And I can see Donnie just reposted the reference list. So thank you.
Yeah, but I don't think the whole thing went up, so we may have to repost it again. I think this was too. It doesn't give us all of it. So
Okay. Well, until next week, as always, as I said, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. I hope we've gotten you thinking about escape routes in a very different way.
Yeah, and did y'all notice how we never mentioned Harriet Tubman? Just want to put that out there.
Not that she doesn't deserve her flowers, but
because she does.
She does. She absolutely does.
But there's just more to us than her. That's all I'm saying.
And there's more. And again, there were many more routes to freedom than just the route to Canada. Because I often wondered that, because I remember when I first learned about the Underground Railroad, I'm thinking, well, how did people get from Texas to Canada? Because that's a long way.
Yeah,
you're going through native territories, some of them who are kind of not, that could be problematic. You're going through slaveholding states to get to Canada. It's like I said, when you learn about Mexico and Cuba and all of those places, it just makes more sense to hop in.
It does.
You may use a fake name to get out of Dodge. So anyone trying to research that may have some challenges. But this whole thing just really opened up the whole kind of history for me.
It did, and Kelly just had me cracking up just now because she said we may need to plan our routes now, and that's. I mean, I'm laughing at it, but I'm crying in the inside because it's so sad. Because my sister and I was just having that whole conversation how she gonna take my mama and move to another country, and she ain't taking my mama. She not taking my mama. We just not having that.
But my escape route is planned.
Yeah, I know. She ain't taking my mama though.
No.
I might have to take my sister out, but that's between me and y'all.
Absolutely not. So again, thank you for spending this hour with us. And until next week, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in all the usual places, I'm Brian Sheffy.
And I'm Donya Williams.
And this has been Genealogy Adventures.
Genealogy Adventures. We love you guys. Bye.
Bye.